we've got this lens now that we've defined, I think, pretty well about, the river versus the village. Now I think we want to define it to other areas, maybe crypto and others, because I think your word balance, or what David was getting at with one versus the other, is pretty important with respect to risk here, because they have different pathologies, right? Which is to mean, like, when they go wrong in different ways. And that's why I want to bring in the conversation of our friend Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously the crypto world is very familiar with this name. As are you. I was delighted to find out, to my surprise, in this book, On the Edge, there's like a mini novel all about Sam Bankman-Fried. And you had the opportunity, kind of a weird twist of fate opportunity, if you ask me, to talk to him both before all of the chaos, while he was upward on his way on the ascent, and then also after, like literally interviewing him at his parents' home somewhere in California when he had the old ankle bracelet on, and he was about to go to trial. So this is a pathology, let's say, of maybe the river. And so as we get into the story of Sam Bankman-Fried, and I want to get your take on it in a second, but first of all, do we really have to claim him? All right, so like crypto, we're in the river, totally acknowledged. But is Sam Bankman-Fried a Riverian? Do we have to claim him, or can we just say, nah, he's not like us? Because I really just don't want to fully claim him, Nate.
The river has to claim him. I don't think crypto alone has to claim him certainly, but he has too many tentacles, I guess is an unflattering description, but too many ties to too many parts of the community, right? I mean, look, he was an investor in Anthropic, the big AI company. He was invested in by some of the top venture capital firms. He was very, very active in the effective altruism movement, maybe the most important financier in that movement, which, is kind of like the river thinking without the gambling part of it, basically. They kind of are the same nerds, but I guess for good and not evil, although I don't come down particularly kindly on them in certain ways. But no, you have to claim Sam as like a metaphor for when this thinking goes awry. Because it was, because the number of people who vouch for him too, it's like, it's Sequoia Capital and it's these Oxford philosophers, and he's up at the stage in the World Economic. I mean, even the Village kind of embraced him, right? He's on the stage at the World Economic Forum in shorts and with a fidget spinner or whatever. So I think we have to claim him, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree, actually. And whether or not we claim him, the Village blames the Riverians for Sam Bankman-Fried. They're basically the exhibit A for everything that they want to do on tech or in crypto. They're basically like, yeah, give us another Sam Bankman-Fried. That's what you're trying to do here, right? So they use it, whether we claim him or not. He's kind of in the discussion. I just want to ask you about kind of the making of this. How surreal was it to actually witness his epic rise and fall? Because as I said just a minute ago, you were there for both. Like, how bizarre is that?
It was very surreal being in the Bahamas, I guess, 7 days after they declared bankruptcy and 5 days before he got arrested, somewhere in that vicinity. One reason that it's weird is that you fly to the Bahamas, and I had been to as far as tropical, I've been to Hawaii and Costa Rica, right? So I kind of thought, oh, it's going to be this luxury resort and the whole island's going to be really nice. And instead there's a lot of wealth inequality in the Bahamas. So I'm staying in Nassau, which is kind of where the two major casino resorts are and kind of the cruise ships and things like that. So Sam's complex, the Albany, is on the other side of the island. It's quite remote. It's quite isolated. And there's this giant condo where they're down to 5 people left. Sam, the 2 remaining FTX employees, because they all fled, and then his parents. And when I got there, they're like, oh yeah, Sam's asleep currently, but we'll have his mom wake him up. I'm like, this is pretty fucking weird, right? and and it's starts at 3 at night, and then but the sun goes, it's a long interview, right? And it's getting darker. It's very weird. It's I don't want to turn the lights on because if you're an interviewer, you want to put pressure on your subject, right? And I'm it's getting very weird. It's all fucking pitch black now, right? And but yeah, look, I think Sam, after the bankruptcy, he has mixed motivations. I think part of it is simply being lonely, even though I think he often had trouble processing human emotions. I think it's difficult when don't have your girlfriend run your hedge fund. is one lesson that I
Well,
have. And don't
there's
have
so many lessons here. So you were there after bankruptcy, where he was kind of like panicking, but prior to arrest, you were there in the Bahamas, and that's I was reading in your book, and you were talking about like you actually didn't know whether like Sam would just like sprint from his chair wherever you were interviewing, and like grab your recorder at some point in time. You know, he's kind of like backed into a corner at the time of your interview, right?
I mean, look, he was in a pretty desperate situation. He was telling me things that, would look bad, right? I mean, he told me a lot of things on the condition that we agreed on that, like, this can be published for the book, but not sooner, right? I couldn't go to the New York Times and say, oh, I have a big scoop on Sam. It's newsworthy, therefore publish it. He only said certain things because he thought it was going to be published a year and a half later. It was actually 2 years later, basically, in some cases. But he said things that I think were somewhat incriminating. He also said a lot of things that were lies, were false, and that was contradicted by lots of court testimony. And I have the advantage of being able to write the book after I could get the court transcripts and things like that. There were times when it pretty explicitly felt like he was also auditioning arguments with me. Like, will this work in front of the jury? Will this work in front of the media? And that felt at times a little bit uncomfortable, but at the same time, he has given me these very candid interviews. You have some work in separating out the kind of half truths from the lies from the mostly truths. And so it was a great story that kind of fell into my lap.
It's an incredible story. And of course, so you interviewed him. He was obviously arrested. By the way, it was a bizarre behavior, not just to you, also publicly. The fact that he was tweeting all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, we were like, what is that? Why is he doing that? How do you explain that personality?
I think partly it's just the isolation is hard to understate, especially because he's gone from like shooting commercials with Tom Brady and being invited to like the Met Gala and being seen as like, you're the next royalty, right? You're the next Elon Musk. And he had dreams of being worth $1 trillion. And now it's all gone. So part of it's just kind of that famous tweet storm that starts out with what or whatever. Yeah. Like, I think we shouldn't assume that this is all part of some rational calculation. I think he was desperate. I mean, his mind was kind of literally reeling. You could almost like hear the proverbial gears turn about how is there a way I can get out of this? And he had some crazy idea where he would be able to, it would be handed back to him. So FTX could begin trading to occur again so they could get trading fees and therefore over a long period get their way out of bankruptcy and things like that. So he just, look, maybe it's, if you're ever in a position where you're stuck in some cave or something, right, in Thailand, and you're like waiting for the rescue crew, maybe you kind of like, to have the instinct like, okay, how can I increase my chances of surviving from 0% to 5%, even if it's desperate? Like, maybe you have some weird, bizarre admiration for that, but he was in a bad spot, and I think as someone who thinks it's dishonorable to, I mean, I think he has trouble feeling emotions, and that's part of what causes an issue. But also I think has trouble opening up and being vulnerable, although after a long day of interviews, then you could see times when he felt let down. And again, I am not trying to dignify this. I'm going to just report what he told me, right? He felt very let down by his community. He felt like the Silicon Valley VCs were useless and never gave any real advice. It was just all boilerplate. He thought the effective altruists were kind of fake. He thought he was always pretty cynical about crypto. He's like, yeah, it's just a way to make money, and flattered himself that way. I think that, I'm going to it's kind of a interesting thesis, right? I want to get really into crypto and make these, arbitrage trades between Korea and Japan to then invest in effective altruism. I mean, I kind of get it. If you like kind of map it out, it's like, okay, I can see how if A and B and C and D and E and F are all true, then that makes sense. But like somewhere along the way, that chain of assumptions might be dubious, I suppose. He clearly also had a competitive streak, as nearly every Riverian does, and was interested in politics. I mean, he was donating a lot to Democratic candidates, donating a lot behind the scenes to Republicans as well. You can argue it's rational that there's a lot of money on the line based on crypto regulation, and probably lobbying pays for itself pretty well. But I think had fairly naive ideas about politics. He invested, for example, millions and millions of dollars in one congressional primary in Oregon for a candidate named Carrick Flynn, who didn't actually know Sam, but was effective altruist adjacent. And it got to the point where when Carrick would go around and knock on voters' doors, they'd be like, oh, here are all the flyers you sent me. Here's all the literature. And they were really annoyed that Sam Bankman-Fried, this mysterious PAC, had sent them 33 flyers about Carrick Flynn to their nice little, rural household in the Willamette Valley or whatever. So not being
Weird.
not being actually a great assessor of risk and being a little bit too.
It was like an overconfidence, and that story was an overconfidence. He invested like $12 million in this Democratic primary, and because he was like sending out so much spam with all of his money, he could actually cause this Democrat to actually lose the election. Was the story you gave, which I think that's what you're talking about when you say when Riverians step into politics. Often they do so with such an overconfidence. They're in over their skis. I want to get, Nate, kind of your theory on SBF, okay? Because like I think you talked to him before and after, and through this lens of risk taking. I think you have probably the best theory that I've ever read, or at least the most comprehensive in assessing the different modes. And it's basically, you lay this out. There's this nice table. It's a 4-quadrant table in your book, and I'll just like go through it at the high level, like in terms of what it said to me. You're basically like, okay, so the theory of SBF, here there's 4 different theories. First of all, you've got this axis as he either knew what he was doing, right? Like it was intentional, or it was unintentional. It was negligence. So, and by the way, the moral framework here is, at least in a court of law, if it was intentional and he caused all of these people to lose all this money, it would be evil, right? That's the thing. If you're doing this intentionally, you are an evil person, at least according to our morality, ethics, and legal code. If it's unintentional, all right, well, you still have culpability, but it would also be sad and tragic. At least it's not as evil. So you've got this axis of, was it intentional or unintentional? And then you have this other axis of his capability. He was either an incredibly capable person, or he was an incompetent person, right? He was either a boy genius, or he was kind of like a fake it till you make it nitwit. And so in your book, you've got these 4 quadrants, and like I gave names to these quadrants. He was either an evil genius, okay? That's if he was doing this intentionally and he was good at it, or he was a tragic genius if he was doing this unintentionally and he was good at it, or he was an evil moron, like kind of a fraud, right? That's if he was doing this intentionally, but he just sucked at it. Or he was a tragic moron, which would be if he was doing this unintentionally, but like very deficiently. And so what's your take? What do you think he is? Is he the evil genius, tragic genius, evil moron, tragic moron? Where do you fall down on this?
No, I lean pretty heavily toward the evil moron part. I mean, it's clear that he knew what he was doing. I mean, the court testimony from Carolyn Ellison in particular is very, very, very compelling on this, enough so that the lawyer I talked to, kind of as the case was winding up, was like, SBF should not take the witness stand. The government's case is too good. He will only make the jury mad. He will only potentially bring up perjury charges and get a longer sentence. He should not do this. And he did it, of course, and got a 20-year sentence.
He went with the tragic genius defense, didn't he?
He tried to, right? He tried to say, oh, it's just all, I mean, I think he overestimates his ability for how effective his bullshit is. Although, again, like, I don't know. One problem that I have with the effective altruist community that I bring up in the book is that they kind of think, oh, we're the moral people here, right? We take this effective value maximization skill set and apply it to make the world better. But the one thing they don't have is they don't have skin in the game, right? They don't know what it's like to make a trade that you feel really great about, and then you get crushed and you're totally on the wrong side of the news, or what it's like to play a poker tournament where you're like, I'm going to win that fucking tournament this time. And then you take a bad beat or punt off chips in a hand. And they don't have this like hands-on experience where you have to be in the river a little bit wary and cautious of people. We've all seen people who are more hype than reality, who are too good to be true. I mean, and Sam, by the way, also like played into this intentionally. I mean, like, look, he's not the world's most charismatic guy naturally, but he figured out that, look, if you kind of play the stereotype of like the Spectrum-y founder who comes into the meeting in a hoodie or in shorts, right? And, oh, you're playing video games while you're in the meeting, and you actually let that be known, and you're sleeping on a beanbag, and like some of these things are half true. Some of them are less than half true, I suppose. Some are mostly true, but he very deliberately kind of cultivated that image to kind of hack the VC algorithm and like, oh, here's the next Mark Zuckerberg. Because the thing I heard over and over again from VCs, and I talked to some of the best in Silicon Valley, is we don't want the next Mark Zuckerberg to head out our door when they could have made us 1,000x or 10,000x our investment. They all have some big company they missed, right? They missed Elon, or they missed Google, or they missed Facebook, or or Uber, etc. And they all regret it and think about how much money they could have had if this guy they thought was a little weird had been allowed to pursue his idea and given capital. So they helped to enable SBF too.
Yeah, they almost from an EV perspective have to invest in the SBF persona, right? And I want to emphasize that you actually think Sam's way of thinking about this world from a risk perspective is actually evil. Like let's say just like morally reprehensible. And this was pulled from the court documents, which we've talked about on Bankless, but I don't think we've ever quoted. Caroline, his girlfriend, of course, the Bankless listeners will be familiar with. She talks about in court how SBF really assesses risk. And this is a question from the prosecution. Did the defendant ever give any example to describe his approach to risk taking? And this is Caroline replying. Yeah, he talked about being willing to take large coin flips, like a coin flip where if it comes up tails, you might lose 10 million, but if it comes up heads, you might make slightly more than 10 million. And the prosecution goes, do you have any other coin flip examples? And here it is. She says, yeah, I guess he also talked about this in the context of thinking about what was good for the world, saying that he would be happy to flip a coin if it came up tails and the world was destroyed, as long as if it came up heads, the world would be like more than twice as good. Okay?
Yeah.
So a coin flip for the entirety of humanity, a bet on the world, so long as it was positive EV, Sam Bankman-Fried, on behalf of humanity, is willing to take those odds. And that's the demented part when it comes to risk assessment that the villagers see from Riverians, right? Because the thing about Sam is he's making this bet on behalf of all of his depositors' money, and he hasn't asked them. They bear all of the risk. He gets the upside, and he's making the bet in an undemocratic way. It's just like him deciding for everyone else. And I think the village sees this, and they're like, you can't make those types of decisions for us.
Correct. I mean, and they should think that. I mean, look, the first time that humankind got the ability to destroy itself was in the atomic tests in New Mexico in 1945, right? And there was a chance at those tests in the Manhattan Project, the physicists were a little bit worried, had a 1 in 1,000 chance that maybe our calculations are wrong and we'll start a global fireball that will engulf the entire Earth's atmosphere. But at least then it was in time of war where they felt like the world was an existential threat and it was a government-run project. And but SBF was a big investor in Anthropic. There is a world in which he spins out of FTX and is running a AI company or something. And some people in our world, I guess, think that if AI is misaligned, it could have very bad effects, including the destruction of civilization as we know it. And who the fuck gives Sam Bankman-Fried or Sam Altman, who the book is more positive on, to be sure, the right to decide that for all of humanity? That just doesn't seem. And also the fact that he always miscalculates, right? It'd be one thing if at least you actually got your 51% odds, but with Sam, they might really be 30 or something like that. And so we're not even making a plus EV bet, even if by his framework. But no, he demonstrates the limitations of utilitarianism taken to the extreme. And I think he was, based on multiple sources, really was willing to push things to the extreme. I mean, he really thought that his objective when running FTX was how can I maximize the chances of being a trillionaire, even if the risk of ruin is incredibly high, right?
Who thinks that?
It's so weird. He kept asking me, Nate, do you think that if I had played my cards differently, I could have staved off the bankruptcy for a few more months and then kind of figure out another plan? I'm like, yeah, sooner or later, I think you're probably going to, it's not a really sustainable idea. He's like, yeah, it's probably true. Right. But I wanted to keep playing the game for another few months and maybe you get lucky and there's a big uptick in the market and then your finances are liquid again and your portfolio looks okay. And so he was very, very, very willing to make this insane bet literally for the future of the world.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.